Very often we make many presumptions, and based on those presumptions, that becomes our reality. Relationships, how to process events, everything. So very often, sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. But when the presumption based on your evaluation analysis is off about someone else, it becomes a problem. Meaning you see something, you hear something, and because of the setting, you assume it couldn't have happened if not. The examples the Chofetz Chaim gives, if a person says something in a public setting, it must be true, because who would have that level of arrogance or that gumption to be able to make such a statement because it's so outlandish unless it must be true? And everybody has his way of accepting it and processing it, more or less. There's an expression, we take things with a grain of salt. You may take it with a grain of salt, but you're taking something. There's certain situations you're not permitted to accept it, to believe it to any degree. You're supposed to literally shut your ears to it. Because whatever we hear, you never know when it would start resonating with you. I mentioned a while back, that there was a certain person many years ago, he was taking a course in comparative religions at NYU. And you have to study about other religions, which are deities, which is paganism. And halachically, it's problematic. Because when we say in the Shema, the third paragraph of the Shema, we say, Lo susura achrei levavchem. You should not veer after your hearts. And the Talmud tells us, levavchem ze minus. That's heresy. You're not permitted to read heretical works. Einechem asher hetem zonem achreim. That you zona achreim. The word znus usually means promiscuity. So the Talmud says that's referring to paganism. Person wants to consider, he's curious, study about it. You never know how you could be touched. There's a famous chinuch who's a codifier. He's one of the codifiers. He usually goes similar to the position of Rambam, Maimonides, and he usually gives the philosophical background on all 613 mitzvos, the positive and negative commandments. And over there he writes about that when we eat the Paschal lamb, where we demonstrate, and we eat in a reclining position, and we demonstrate and commemorate and reenact and relive freedom, that we're free men, the Torah says, although it's a positive commandment to eat the meat of the Paschal lamb, what we call Korban Pesach, but you're not permitted to break the bone to extract the marrow from the bone. Although marrow is meat, Torah says, but you're not permitted to break the bone. So the chinuch asks, why not? I mean, a person enjoys sucking the bones, extracting the marrow from the bone. Why should it be a prohibition? Torah prohibition. It's a negative commandment. So he says, because who gnaws on bones? Dogs. I mean, here you're in a position, you've achieved, and you've been put on a pedestal by God to be seen as the ultimate people. Free men. You're no longer slaves. And your true profile will radiate, and the world will recognize it. And you should recognize who you are. It's not something you do. You don't gnaw on bones, because it's contradictory to the whole mindset and emotional state of being free men. So the chinuch says, does it really make a difference? Will it really somehow impair our sense of being free men if we gnaw on bones? So he says, that question is based on a lack of experience of life, because it's a known fact, Odom nifal kfi polosov, that a man becomes a product of his behavior, of his actions. The way we live, the way we behave, ultimately, that becomes part and parcel of who we become. And ultimately, over time, and he says something very interesting. He says you have a person who's evil. and you compel him and force him to do acts of righteousness, ultimately he'll become righteous. Although he was compelled and forced to do acts of goodness and kindness and purity, and a person who's righteous, devoutly righteous, you force him to do acts of evil, over time he will become evil. Because a human being, is a product of his behavior, of his actions. That's the principle he sits down. He says, therefore, if a person gnaws on the bones, as much as you feel doesn't infringe on your mind, on your emotional state of being free, ultimately it will be an infringement. Therefore, the Torah says you have to experience at the most advanced level without any level of infringement, of detraction. It shouldn't be impaired. So the Rambam writes that if a person lives in a community where the community has a representation where you could be influenced, the Rambam says that even if you have to go live in a desert and you have to flee into a cave to be protected, because ultimately that environment will actually compromise who you are and you'll become part and parcel of that society. Therefore, you have to remove yourself from that society. Otherwise, you can become a victim of whatever the society represents. That's the Rambam. So similarly, you take this course in comparative religions, as much as your mind is not, but factually, you're an intellectual person. You hear their position, unless even if you refute it, you say, well, that's not my belief. Unless a person is going into the area of refuting paganism, you're an outreach person, and you're going to influence people and to show them why it's wrong, so then you're permitted, because there the studying is to refute it, to show exactly why our religion is the authentic truth and what they have is not. It's wrong, it's false. But to study it just for curiosity's sake, or even for credit's sake, to get the credit, it's a Torah violation. This is lo sesuru asher atem zonim achreim. Znus, the Gemara says, the Talmud says, is referring to idolatry, paganism. So I'm saying, if a person goes and you live in a community where people's mouths, they run as long as they're awake, and the subject matter which comes out of those mouths are gossip, falsehood, decadent values, whatever it may be, you hear it, you're exposed to it. I'm not even talking about the person who's being victimized. You yourself will become a victim of this kind of behavior, of speaking irresponsibly about someone that you shouldn't speak about. And as I said, we make many presumptions. How could it not be true if it's stated in a public setting? How could it not be true if it's stated in a newspaper? How could it not be true if a public official says it, or whatever it be? How could that be true? Because there's so many ramifications and consequences, the person couldn't be that irresponsible. I mentioned a few weeks ago that the Meraglim, the spies, when they slandered the land, they came back with these ominous reports. They understood, and Rashi cites the Midrash, every, I'm using the word lie, falsehood, has to have a certain element of truth. Because if it doesn't have an element of truth, it doesn't stand for a moment. So even if you hear something which resonates with truth, because everything has some degree of truth, but since it may be embedded or surrounded or infected with gross exaggerations, which are not true, and even if they are true, it's information which you have no right to listen to. Therefore, ultimately, you're not permitted to listen to any of it. There's a negative commandment. The Torah says, lo sechonim. This has to do with a non-Jew, that you're not supposed to praise non-Jews for the sake of praise. For instance, I'll give you an example. Person needs information on a doctor, on an architect, on a builder, on a mason, or whatever it may be, mechanic. And you say, this mechanic's one of a kind, nobody is his equal. And he's not Jewish. 100% permitted. Because that is for constructive reasons. You want the best doctor, the best whatever it may be, practitioner, definitely. What a person just wants to praise the non-Jew because he's just impressed and overwhelmingly enthralled with his personality, with his writings, whatever it may be. Not to encourage somebody else to read what he had written, but just to praise him, how impressed you are with the person. The Rambam writes, it's based on the Gemara, on Talmud, it's a negative commandment. Why? Because when a person has a relationship and sees somebody in a positive light, even the one aspect or many aspects of the person is very positive, you can't discern between one aspect of the person and the other aspect of the person. You accept the person in his totality. And since part of that person has beliefs which are contrary to what you're permitted to believe, and values which may be contrary to what values you're permitted to have, ultimately you're going to be impressed and affected by that person. And that's the reason why you're not permitted, for that reason. That's lo sichonim. Lo sitin lemchein. Don't put them in this state of esteem and charm for the sake just to esteem them, to revere them, because ultimately it's going to affect you because you're going to embrace the totality of the person. I'll give you an example. King Solomon Shlomo, who is the wisest man who ever lived, says, Zecher tzarech lifrocha. When you speak about a devoutly righteous person, you have to always speak about him in the most illustrious, reverent way, within the context of blessing. Shem Rishon Yirkov, the name of the evil should rot. Rot means there's no trace of them. Why? But maybe that evil person, he did do something which was positive for society. No, because the moment you start valuing and revering any aspect of that evil person, you get the whole ball of wax with it. And as a result of that, it could have, so therefore Shlomo, King Solomon says, Shem Rishon Yirkov. I'll give you an example. The Talmud says, Reb Meir, who was one of the greatest members of the Mishnaic period, he had a Rebbe. His Rebbe's name was Acher. What happened? Why was he called Acher? He was one of the great Tanoim, great members of the Mishnaic period. He became a heretic. What happened? He had seen a father instructing his child to climb a tree, a ladder, to send away a mother bird before the child takes the chicks on behalf of the father. The two positive commandments in the Torah, which the only two would speak about longevity of life, long life, honoring the parent and sending away the mother bird before you take the chicks or the eggs. This child goes and listens to the instruction of his father, climbs the ladder, is about to send away the bird or sends away the bird, and the child falls to his death. Here you have two positive commandments compounded, where the Torah says, if you do even one of them, you merit longevity, a long life, and here it's compounded, and he falls to his death. So this person, Elisha, by our viewer, says, how could this be? If this is the way it is, les din v'les dayin. There's no judgment, there's no judge, there's no God. It's all nonsense. I'm out of here. Because of this one event he saw, he threw out the baby with the bathwater. He's out. And he became a heretic. He was the Rebbe, he was the teacher of Meir, the great Tana Reb Meir. And the Talmud says he continued studying from him even after he became a heretic. Even after he became a heretic. So the Talmud asks, it's the Jerusalem Talmud asks, how did he study from him? You're not permitted to study from this kind of person. He's an evil person. Shlomo says, Shem Rishon Yirkov. The name of the evil should rot. Because as we said, based on this principle, because the moment you have value from that kind of person, you can't discern between one part of the person and the other. And ultimately you're going to be impressed by him. His views, his characteristics, his traits, whatever it may be. So the Talmud answers, the Jerusalem Talmud, that he was able to take the fruit and cast away the rind. Reb Meir was so great, he was the one, he had that ability, that he could discern between the good and the bad. But anybody other than Reb Meir was known, he's referred to as Rav Noroi. He was called, Rav Noroi in Aramaic means the enlightener. because he enlightened all the eyes of all the Tanoim in halachic matters. He had a level of genius which was one of a kind, Rameir. Rameir had that ability which was one of a kind, and therefore he was permitted, but no one else is permitted. So we see this principle that if you value someone, even for one aspect, but if the other parts of that person represent something which is forbidden or evil, you're not permitted to engage with that person, because ultimately you're going to be victimized. That's therefore you're not permitted. So I'm saying a certain person has certain values. You hear something. Everything's based on what? On the assessment. How does a person make an evaluation? The average person who is not proficient, what he's permitted to say, what he's not permitted to say, and even if he's aware, he may not have any regard for what he speaks his mind. So listening to this and listening long enough to it, besides doing the wrong thing, by accepting something which has no constructive value in terms of information, ultimately, you yourself become careless and damaged in this area. You lose your sensitivity in terms of how you deal and speak about other people. So if you want to keep your head way above the water and not reach the point where you may go below the sea level, beneath the water, you have to just stay clear of this. And you can't make any assumptions, because very often the assumptions are so foolish. Like, it's like when the pharmaceuticals, if it's not sterile to condition 100% pure, if it's any degree of microscopic degree of contamination, the drug is discarded. So you got to speak to a novice, guy who goes out, and he shoots the breeze. He says, I don't see anything wrong with it. Don't you realize this thing expired before you were born, this medication? What are you talking about? You're going to take this medication? What are you talking about? This is an antique. Antiques have greater value. Yeah, but this medication is not an antique. So you see, and that's basically what people understand. Everybody comes from his own vantage point, which is so archaic and backward, but they're up on the latest things, the latest computer, the latest electronic gadget, that they're up. But what they should be up on, they don't even begin understanding where they're not at. So therefore, the Chofetz Chaim writes that although we make certain evaluations based on presumptions, unless the presumption is accurate and correct, you have no right to make any presumptions. So even a person would say something in a public setting, or will say it in his presence, because he wouldn't have the arrogance to embarrass a person. So it must be true, because he wouldn't. There's no indication of anything. There are all kinds of people out there, and people speak their minds. What about if you have multiple people saying the same thing? You had 10 of the 12 spies came back with ominous reports, which was slander. So if you have 10-2, they voted to go after the majority. But they made the wrong choice. Because these 10 people had issues, and because of those issues, they processed it in their slanted, corrupted way. And because of that, we spent another 39 years wandering before we went into Israel, into the Promised Land for this reason. Very often, we're supposed to learn from history. If you learn from history, things don't repeat themselves. A person many years ago, you haven't seen him in the past 25 years. And you want to pass judgment on them today based on something which you experienced 25 years. People change, hopefully for the better. I'll tell you a very interesting story. Many years ago, I gave a women's class, and it was a very special class. Special people came. One day a woman shows up. Must have been a woman in her mid-30s, maybe close to 40, dressed impeccably like a businesswoman. And she comes to the class and sits, doesn't say a word. And afterwards I speak to her, I ask her name, and she tells me her name. And I asked her, what is your background? She says, I have no background. I come from a Reform background. We have a home in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm originally from Baltimore. Beth, she's from Baltimore. She's from the Blaustein family, the Blausteins. And she's married to a man who's one of the top literary lawyers in the United States. And he does work for Mayo Clinic. And gives a, she herself was the executive director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and at one time at Carnegie Hall. She's a woman about 40 years old, early 40s maximum. Very accomplished woman, respectful. So I said, so why did you come to this class? She says, I'll tell you the reason why I came to this class. Because based on statistics, she says, I want my children to marry Jews. And based on statistics, if I don't know anything about Judaism, I can't in any way share this with my children. It's inevitable they're going to marry out. I don't want my children to marry out. Therefore, I want to learn as much as I can about our heritage to impress upon them their own value that they should marry out. That's why I came to the class. That's why I'm here. And I said, it's a phenomenal reason, and you're right, not even a question. And she came for an extended period of time, and she says to me, she says, I said, do you even observe Yom Kippur? She says, yes. He says, every Yom Kippur, she prepares a breakfast in the afternoon. They come home from temple in the afternoon, they break the fast. They fast a few hours, whatever it is, they have a breakfast. I mean, she had no idea, inkling of what is and what's not. That's how she wasn't exposed to know exactly what it is. She's coming. So she says to him, what should I do now for my children? So she had one boy was 5, one boy was 4, 2 children, and they went to a private school. It was called Hiawatha in Manhattan. That was the school, private school. And she had a nanny taking care of Filipino woman, took care of her children. So I said, I would suggest, so then Rabbi Rieti, today's very well-known speaker, Rabbi Rieti, and he was an Englishman. His father was an actor in England, and he has many of his skills. He was his father's skills. And I said, I suggest your 2 sons should study with this Rabbi Rieti. He's a very gifted person, and he could really impress upon your children, teach them, and he has a sense of humor, and he knows exactly how to deal with children. She says, not a problem. She says, I'd have to discuss it with my husband. My husband? I said, fine. Discuss it with your husband, and we'll hear what he says. She comes back the next week. My husband has vetoed it. I said, why did he veto it? Because he feels he wants his own children to make choice, whatever it was. I said, you tell your husband, I want to see him. And I'll discuss it with him. Next week, the husband comes in. Must be a person 6'6". I mean, tall man, 6'4". Sits down. I said, what's the reason why you're opposed to it? Your wife has a concern that if your children don't know about that, appreciate who they are, they're going to marry out. Because I believe that your children have to have free choice. And if I give them this level of education, this is going to infringe on their free choice, because now I'm forcing him to be a certain direction, and otherwise they're not going to have that choice. I said to the contrary. I said, you could be an observant Jew. I said, it takes 1 second to give it up. To acquire it, it's a lifetime. I said, the statistic is, if you don't do something for your child, education-wise, Jewish education, it's inevitable, as your wife said, they're out the door. So to the contrary, you're giving your children choice when they know they have a choice. But if they're totally oblivious that there's anything out there but whatever's out there, they have no choice. This is what I say to him. So he says to me, he says, I went to Talmud Torah in the 50s. And, I didn't have a good experience. And therefore, I don't want my children to have that kind of experience. I remember what the system was, this and that. I said, once they go to college, they can make their own choices. They want to look into it, dabble in it, but right now, I don't want to give them what I went through. This is what he says to me. I said to him, you're supposed to be a top literary lawyer. You're supposed to be a smart person. I said, it's interesting. It's in the mid-'80s, and you're passing judgment on an educational system 35 years later, something you experienced as a child. If you would ask me, give me the curriculum. I'll review it, I'll study it. It's the same, okay, you give me your decision. But you're telling me because something that you experienced when you're 8, 10 years old, you're passing judgment on the whole Jewish educational system. I said, you know something? I'm not impressed. This is what I said to him. He says to me, okay. And he was agreeable. He was agreeable. His 2 children were tutored by Rabbi Rieti, each one till their bar mitzvah. And every week they would come, the 2 of them. He taught them how to read Hebrew. He taught them how to say brachos. He taught them about the holidays. Taught them much. And each of them had an Orthodox bar mitzvah. Rabbi Rieti came and he officiated at the bar mitzvah. Okay? And they bought especially art scroll Sidurim for the people who came to the bar mitzvah, for all these Reform Jews came to the bar mitzvah. And the father comes to me after the bar mitzvah. The first one's he says to me, Rabbi, the experiment worked. I said, what experiment? He says, you can't imagine. Because my 2 sons came every week together to study with Rabbi Rieti, they're so close. They're the best friends. They'll be close for the rest of their lives. It's unbelievable what this brought about. Besides everything else. Phenomenal. What he suggests now. So I said, what I would suggest now is firstly, I said, are you part of a synagogue, temple? Do you belong anywhere? No, they don't believe. Unaffiliated. I said, I would suggest you live not far from KJ. You should join the congregation. Nobody there will check to see how observant you are, not observant. Open-minded people. They have children, your children's age. And whatever, you go as often as you want, and not as often. At least you're affiliated. It's important to be affiliated. That's the first thing. Secondly, as your children became close, because you studied together, I suggest that Rabbi Rieti should study with you, your wife, and your children. You should all study together. And really have a bonding in the family itself. He wasn't willing to do that. It doesn't make a difference. But I want to show you, in terms of people passing judgment, and experience that years in the past on today, well, I remember him. And therefore, because you remember him 30 years ago or 25 years ago when you were in college together or high school together, whatever it is, you're passing judgment on today. Therefore, firstly, people change. And people do change. People mature. Unless you've done your due diligence to understand that he's the same, you have no right to say anything negative about him. Not whatsoever. I'm just saying, so the same thing. Just because, based on our sense of whatever may be, well, I heard. A friend of mine has just seen him. Doesn't mean anything. You have no right. You have no right to paint the person with a black brush or whatever brush you want to paint him with, put him in a negative light. You have no right to do this. You know, we speak about Chil Hashem, that people who have a certain representation in the Jewish community, their behavior is not on par, and people draw lessons from them because they're supposed to be the trendsetters. So if this is the rabbi, this is the more learned person, that's the way he behaves, evidently that's not a problem. So let's say, I'm talking about specifically this area, people say things which they shouldn't say. Even if they're permitted, maybe on a personal level, you're permitted, but not public knowledge. I'll give you an example. Ramosha Feinstein, Zeich Tzadik Livrocha, who was the leading decisor of generation, there were times where a person would come from a halakhic decision, and he would say to him, this is for you, but it's not for public consumption. Why did he say that? Because sometimes there's certain aspects of the question which are unique to the person, to the questioner. But if you put it out there, everybody says, well, this leniency has relevance to me. It may not. Because if you don't understand the nuances of the question and why he answered the way he answered, you don't understand why it doesn't have, this leniency has no relevance to most people. Give an example. There's a famous story in the late 1800s in the old community of Yerushalayim. So the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, his name is Reb Shmuel Salant. Reb Shmuel Salant, and his father's name was Reb Yosef Zundel Salant. The very holy Reb Shmuel Salant lived till about 102 years old. Passed away in the early 1900s. And he had a very wise man. And the community was, in 1800, was impoverished. They had no means of livelihood, but there were a few people who had some money, relatively speaking. And this woman comes and asks a question. She put a piece of chicken in the cholent, which is the Shabbos food for Ashkenazic Jews. We call cholent. Sephardic Jews eat something else. And there was a question whether the chicken wing was kosher or not. And he ruled leniently. She's permitted to eat the cholent, not a problem. Gave her a blessing, enjoy it. That's it. Have oneg Shabbos. A friend of hers comes with the exact same question because she bought the chicken at the same butcher. And he says, you're not permitted to eat it. And here she prepares this cholent, not to have a Shabbos with cholent. The Shabbos is compromised. What could you do? She accepts the rabbi's ruling. These two women meet on Sunday, and one shares the rabbi, his greatness, that here she has this question. She bought this chicken wing from the butcher, whatever it is, and he ruled it's permitted. She says, I had the exact same question. And he ruled that it's not kosher. And therefore, I had to throw out all the Shabbos food. So the other woman goes to Rabbi Shmuel Salant, and she says to him, why? I mean, do we have a two-track system over here? For one person, you rule one way. For another person, he says, you don't understand. It's cited within the context of halacha, of definitive law, that there is a leniency, but if it's a hefsid meruba, if it's the person will take a great financial loss, you have a right to rely on this leniency. This woman is so impoverished, even not to have that cholent and Shabbos was a great financial loss. So therefore, for her, it's permitted to rely on this leniency. You, because you don't have that level of impoverishment, I'm not permitted to rely on that leniency. Therefore, two identical situations, but if you don't know the nuances of the background, you say, well, it's all the same. It's not the same. Very often, Rav Moshe Feinstein would give a ruling, he says, it's for you, it's not for public consumption. Person doesn't know why, because you have to be a great decider to understand the nuances, to understand why it's for you and not for someone else. So very often, certain things you're permitted to say, for whatever, because it has constructive value for this person. Now, if it becomes public knowledge, it's slander. Because anybody else, slander means he's being put in a light, not within a constructive context. Then it takes on a new label. It's called gossip. You're gossiping. Did you hear? It has no relevance. Did you hear is such a destructive, the curiosity of did you hear, and people perk their ears up. We read Kalev ben Yefuna, two of the spies who came back with very positive reports. There were 10, and there was Yoshua ben Nun and Kalev ben Yefuna. Kalev ben Yefuna himself was a first-class diplomat. He was the prince of the tribe of Judah. And they thought, the 10 believed he was part of their group. He was part of their group. That he was coming out to bring back reports even more negative than their reports. And they come back and they unload all their negativity. The Jews are about to break down, cry, and this and that. Kalev gets up, and he was a charismatic personality, stands up at the podium, and he screams. He says, everybody's silent, because they want to hear what he has to say. Prince of the tribe of Judah, his leadership, and he's reeling in a lambast Moshe. The others they unloaded. He's going to bring it over the top. It says, Vayash Kalev Esom, he silenced them. And he says, Ben Amram, is that all he did to us? He split the sea, he this. And he puts Moshe up on a pedestal to show them that their interpretation is wrong. It's a warped, perverted interpretation. That's Kalev. When he was going to speak, they wanted to hear more negativity. Their ears and emotion and minds were so open to hear more negative. And that's a person. Kalev understood that. So to get them to be fully attentive, and now he's going to deliver what they're supposed to hear, everything positive about Moshe, maybe that'll turn the tide. Maybe the Jews will reconsider to see Moshe in a positive light. In fact, it didn't help. But that's what it says, right? He quieted them, but again, people, the moment they have a sense to hear something negative, everybody's alert, ready to hear, ready to go, ready to consume, to absorb. And because Kalev did that, God said, because Kalev did what he did, he will receive, Hebron will be his portion. When they go into Canaan, he will live. He will not die with the others, he and Yeshua, whatever it may be. But again, but he understood the nature of people. People, unfortunately, they have a certain predilection to hear something negative about another person. And if you play that game well, unfortunately, you'll have many admirers and you'll attract many people. You know, if you have something decaying in the street, you know, all of a sudden you see flies around it. Well, that kind of stuff attracts a lot of stuff. You know, you slander this, you know, pure information, people aren't here. You know, we've heard enough of that. You know, there's a story, Eliyahu Novi went with one of the Amoraim, and he says he wants to give him a tour of certain markets. And he goes down one street, it's deserted. And he says to Eliyahu, why is the street deserted? There's Eliyahu Novi. And he says, you'll understand soon. They walk down the street, they see a big sign, freshly slaughtered venison, a penny a pound. Penny a pound. Place is deserted. He says, doesn't make sense. I mean, if you buy venison so cheap, why aren't there any takers? He says, look, you'll understand pretty soon. Takes him down another street, place, market streets filled with people, bustling, screaming, pushing. People are climbing over one another's shoulders, and they see a sign. Putrid dog meat, $10 a pound. And they're willing to pay anything for it. And they're fighting over it. So this person, Amora, says to Eliyahu, doesn't make any sense. Freshly slaughtered venison, no takers, and putrid dog meat, everybody's grabbing it. It doesn't make sense. He says, I'll explain to you. That's exactly what the world's all about. God gave us mitzvos. God gave us purity. God gave us infinite value. How many takers do you have? Nobody's interested. Or what are they interested? Everything which ultimately represents vile material, which ultimately will bring about their own destruction. That's what people are attracted to. That's the modicum. That's the model of the venison versus that. That's what it is. You have a Dvar Torah to say. You have something constructive, something profound to share with people. No interest. But something negative, something which has a representation of something else, everybody's interested. You know, tzaddikim are not in the hit parade. Who's in the hit parade? Many years ago, the story goes back maybe 35 years ago, I was speaking to George Rohr, and I said to him, because in those days, somebody called me, and this person, what was his name? He's a designer. He's a Jew, and his son went to Duke with this woman's son, and what's his name? Clothing designer. Larry, you're into clothing designer. Ralph Lauren. So Ralph Lauren had a son.
His name was Leibowitz.
Okay. What?
Ralph Lifshitz.
Lifshitz.
He went to YU.
Okay. So Ralph Lauren had a son in Duke with somebody else's son. So this woman calls me up and says, and his son was taking a philosophy course in Duke, that his son is a friend of her son. He has a very strong interest in Judaism. He's going towards, have an interest in studying something. Would I have to have time to study with Ralph Lauren once a week? The woman is going to broach it with Ralph Lauren. So I said, no question. If I have this opportunity, why? Because if Ralph Lauren is a trendsetter in fashion, could you imagine if he would give value to Torah Judaism, being a trendsetter, put it out there? If he has an interest, everybody's going to have an interest, right? Doesn't make sense otherwise. So I shared it with George Rohr. So I said to him then, George, his father was in the market, was one of the top producers in the stock market. So I said, could you imagine a certain person who is also very successful, renowned in Wall Street? I said, could you imagine if I would study with him? Also, he'd become the trendsetter for Judaism. He says, don't tell anybody. He's going to be indicted tomorrow morning. Next day, I'm not going to mention his name. He was indicted. And all the buildings that had his name, they took his name off the buildings. So I'm saying it goes in both ways. The Chil Hashem. You have a person who's a trendsetter. He does something wrong, it's a disgrace for Jews. He does something positive, it's the ultimate level of Kiddush Hashem. So I'm just saying, people, because of their levels of irresponsibility, they're not careful. And because they're not careful, or they're not learned, or not sensitive, they say things and people draw lessons from from those people. Even though the person is not a rabbi. He's a trustee in a synagogue. He's an officer in the shul, whatever it may be. He has some level of representation, or he's looked up to, and he has a certain mode of behavior. So the little guy says, if he could behave that, why can't I behave? If that's okay, why can't I speak this way? So it's like it's the blind leading the blind. That's the problem. And therefore it becomes disastrous. Now there's a discussion, it's not simple. A person who does not keep dietary laws, is he believed regarding if something's kosher or not kosher? It's not simple. People have children, they become observant. And the parents say, we will buy special kosher food for you, kosher utensils, everything kosher, we'd want you should come. For a Sunday afternoon, for a barbecue, for a picnic, whatever it may be. Do the children, even though parents are well-meaning, and they would not in any way deceive their children, could you rely? Because the only reason why a Jew is permitted to believe another Jew is because he has a certain presumed status. It's within a halachic context. Without that, you have no right to believe it. Because it may not be. Because it has to be absolutely, factually true. So let's say the person doesn't keep dietary laws. He says, you can rely on me, it's kosher. Halachically, you're not permitted to rely on that person. Because if he himself doesn't keep dietary laws, is not careful for himself, he cannot be, it's not a question he can't be trusted because he'll do something that is not, he will lie to you. But halachically, you can only rely on people if he's within a certain halachic context. It's not okay, you can't believe. What about, we could say with certainty, a parent will not do anything to hurt their child. That's the way it is. So it's not because it's a halachic issue. It's not because the person has the status of a witness. Within the context of having the status of a witness, the parent doesn't qualify as a witness. But even if we have a situation, I'll give you an example. A non-Jew, within the laws of Torah, has no reliability to be believed. A non-Jew. What about if you ask him something, and if he gives you information, and it will be revealed that he lied to you, then you have a right to believe him. Because nobody wants to be caught in a lie. So therefore, if he offers you information, which ultimately it'll be revealed whether he told you the truth or not, you have a right to rely on him. So you're not relying because he's a qualified witness. Because just the fact, nobody wants to be put in a negative light, he will tell you the truth. So it's like factually, that reality tells you he's telling you the truth. It's referred to in halakha, milstavidu gluyui. It's something which ultimately will be revealed. We could say with certainty he will not lie. Because nobody wants to be caught. For instance, the law is that if you have a question, milk falls into meat, and you're not sure whether you had a sufficient ratio to subsume the milk in the meat, and you go over to a non-Jewish taster, that's his expertise, and you say, could you please taste this for me? And he himself has a reputation as being this expert. What would be if he says it doesn't, and afterwards you taste it, you taste milk? He's going to look bad. It could actually tarnish his reputation of being this upright, professional taster. Therefore, you have a right to rely on him. because he himself, it'll have a negative effect on him. So you're guaranteed he's not lying. So whenever a person understands it's not in his interest and it's negative, it will reflect badly upon him, you have a right to rely on that person. So therefore, the way it's ruled regarding parents, if the parents, the nature of the relationship is, the parents will not mislead the children and do everything what they want because they really want to satisfy the request of the children, even though they may not keep dietary laws, you have a right to rely on them just as being good parents, doing the right thing, they'll do the right thing for the children. Okay? That's the way it is. There's this concept that's known as anansadi. We can all attest with certainty that that is the reality. Even though, you can't draw from one to another. There's another case. People, which are very close to me, students of mine for over 30 years. The father was a very wealthy man. His grandchildren are religious. He wants to take them out to a non-kosher restaurant. Why? Because kosher costs more than non-kosher. You understand? The man spends money like it's going out of style. But when it comes to kosher, non-kosher, kosher is too expensive for him. So he wants to feed his grandchildren who observe kashrus, dietary laws, non-kosher. So his children said, don't do us any favor. Don't take the grandkids out. They can eat at home. We can afford, thank God, we don't need you to take the grandkids out. So people have, all kinds of issues. Those kinds of people, doesn't make how much the grandparents love the grandchildren, doesn't make a difference. They can do the wrong thing for the kids. I had a case many years ago. I had two students, they were both doctors. And we used to have years ago, maybe this is even before Alan, we used to have a Hanukkah party at Greener Pastures. It was a restaurant on the Upper East Side, a dairy restaurant, like a vegetarian restaurant. And the they were single women then, both doctors, and their great aunt was there. And the great aunt says to me, my nieces, they'll come to my house, they wouldn't eat my home today. I don't understand why. Her son was a famous, I don't know if he's still alive, was a famous psychiatrist then. He had a psychiatric institute in New York City. And she said, I don't understand why. And this woman, she had multiple nephews and nieces, and we're all doctors. So I said to her, she says, why, So I said, let me ask you a question. I said, first, will you eat on Yom Kippur? She didn't keep dietary laws. Will you eat? She says, I would choke on the food. Since I'm a child, that's one day I will never eat. I said, why not? You'll eat not kosher, why eat? She couldn't answer me. So I said, let me ask a question. I said, your son's a doctor. If a person needs heart operation, and a person who's not trained, has no medical background, and he says to the surgeon, why do you operate from the chest? Why don't you operate from the back? So you understand? The question is a baseless question. What do you know about medicine? What do you know about anything? So the question itself is a baseless question. It's only as a result of ignorance. You're asking me, why don't your nieces eat at your house? If you would understand the ramifications of not eating non-kosher, the consequences, it wouldn't be a question. As I said, as Yom Kippur, you wouldn't have Yom Kippur. Identically, if you'd understand dietary, you wouldn't have that either. So again, everybody comes from their own vantage point. Where you're coming from, that's your value system. And based on that, so you can't draw lessons from anyone. There are always exceptions. Many times. Many things. People come to me for halachic rulings. I said, keep it quiet. It's for you and not for anyone else. And if they would ever say it to someone else, I wouldn't rule for that person again. Would not do it. Because that person is a loose cannon. I'm not going to go there, person. Somebody says to me, they said in your name that you're permitted to use an instant hot on Shabbos. I said, never said such a thing. Never. Maybe you don't remember. I said, not possible. Impossible. Never said it. It may have been something else about a klishlishi and a this and a that. Well, if that's permitted, so why can't I use an instant hot to make tea on Shabbos or to do something else? What does one thing have to do with another? People have no understanding of what is and what's not. You got to be careful. So if people go and you give them, they hear a piece of information. Firstly, there's the game of telephone. By the time you're finished, it's a whole different story. You can't. And if you understand the seriousness of gossip, of slander, of putting another person in a negative light, then it's best to be careful and not to listen and not to speak unless you have to say something. You shouldn't say it. Now, this is an important point. What about if a rumor goes out in the community? Are you permitted to believe a rumor? It may be true. And the rumor even, not to accept it as fact. Maybe you have to just dismiss it. It may have relevance to you. Is that purely hearsay or it's less than hearsay? What is a rumor? So the Chofetz Chaim speaks about a case. Im yotze kol al echot she'osa maso shediber dover shlo karoi al pi Torah. Somebody had done an action or said something, even something which is very extremely grave. You're not permitted to accept it as fact. It's fact. But you're permitted to take into account, to hold it in abeyance until it will be verified. Because it may have relevance to you. It may have relevance to you. And especially if you want to share it with someone else, you have to give it over in a way that it's purely a rumor. You're not transmitting as fact to the other party. But let's say you share it with someone else and that person will accept it as fact, even though you said not. Then you're not permitted to share it with that person. You're not permitted. I'll give you an example. A person has a habit, he always overeats. Person tells you, I will not overeat. If he overeats, it's literally detrimental to his health. You've gone through this 6 times. Every time, couldn't control himself. He got sick. His wife calls you up, what did you do to my husband? He was just in the emergency room for the 6th time. You know, our insurance is not going to cover any longer. She's not worried about her husband. She's worried about the insurance covering. Is the insurance going to cover? Understand? Factually, I'm permitted, if I give it over in a certain context, I'm permitted to say it. You're not permitted to say it. Because if it's going to be, the consumption is going to be in a way where he's going to accept it as fact, it's lifnei v'losite michshol. You're putting a stumbling block in front of this person because the only buyer beware, take into consideration, maybe someday it may be relevant. But if it immediately it's fact, then you have no right to share it with that person. You know, there's certain politicians who have voting records. And, you know, they had the whole thing with the Iran deal. And there was a question, should they back it, shouldn't they? And there were certain senators. They were amazed. They were originally pro-Israel. Israel, at that time, Netanyahu spoke to Congress to show that it should not be done under any circumstance. And one of the senators was a Jewish senator, and he voted for the Iran deal. And they said, how did you do it, this and that? He actually, you know, didn't have a good reason, okay? And some of these people today have gone south, and they're going more negative. Jewish Congress senators. So the person already has created a factual reputation. It's based on negativity. And you want to say he did something else, and you want to share it with someone. Are you permitted to accept it as fact? Because the person already has a record of voting a certain way, that he changed his direction. Things which are literally, he doesn't take Jewish issues into consideration whatsoever. I'm not even speaking about, firstly, if a person's not an upright Jew, I mean, upright means he doesn't observe things he should observe. There's no prohibition of speaking negative about him. You don't have to take certain things into account. But I'm saying, even if he would be, but he already established a negative record, and it's known in the community, that's the way he normally votes. And so here he did it again. He did it again. Are you permitted to accept it? You're permitted to accept it. Because rumor means a person has a presumed status, he doesn't do that kind of thing. But here, he's already the presumed status, that's the way he votes. So it's another nail in his coffin. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's only more of the same, which he's already, this is his trend. This is the way he does things. And I don't like to speak politics, but I'm saying everybody knows there's certain Jewish senators who actually take on a position which sometimes you pain to hear the level of arrogance they speak. You want to say it, but with such an arrogance, with such a disrespect the way they speak, it's sickening to listen to them. So you want to speak about one of these people. Is it a question of Lashon Hara? Not Lashon Hara. There's another discussion. You may be wasting your time. What are you wasting your time for? Talk about all these things. There's no greater waste of time than talking about politics. What difference are you going to make? Are you going to make a difference? Yes, no? Unless maybe a person is taken on a certain position and you want to explain to them why the position is incorrect, that's a different story. But just to talk for the sake of talking, it's not going to help any. So why talk about it? Why waste your time? Had a case. There was a certain person, he originally was from Vienna, and he was married. It was a second marriage for him. He was married to this woman for many years, also from Vienna, but they were living in Israel. They're living in Tel Aviv. Very wealthy woman. And one day, I was down in Florida, I see him. He was dressed differently, different persona. And I didn't want to go over to him because I didn't want to embarrass him. Then afterwards, he calls me if I could do him a favor. That this woman, he's not willing to divorce her because the amount of money that he owes her and what she did to him and slandered him, with people who have a lot of money, it carries a lot of clout within certain political systems. And there was almost like a warrant for his arrest in Israel, that if he ever comes into Israel, they have his name, they're going to arrest him because the court had ruled that he has to divorce his wife, and if not, he's going to prison. That was the ruling. So he called me here in the United States, and he said to me, could I help him? Because he starts unloading, telling me things. I said, look, I don't know what is, what's not. You want me to put you in touch with someone who could help you? I'm happy to help to do that. I knew him. Was he a little flamboyant, this and that, when he had the money, when he was married, And he had claims against the money she owed him, this, that, whatever it was. And so I said, I'll put you in touch with this person. I put him in touch with this person. And the person did it. He was a student of Moshe Feinstein. And he did his due diligence, kind of touch with certain people, even back in Israel. And ultimately, it was divulged and it revealed his position. He had a basis for what he was saying. That she really was trying to destroy him for whatever reason. And it wasn't the get. It wasn't that she would divorce. And ultimately, they told her, unless they settled the finances between two of them, she doesn't deserve to be divorced. Doesn't deserve. So originally I said, look, I can't accept that. I don't know what is. I don't know what's what. Everybody has their presumed status. You claim this, you claim that. I'm not involved. If I'm not involved, and very often we hear things because you have relationships, immediately you side with one. You have to remain objective. You have no right to assume anything. As you're innocent, she may be innocent. Like I said, there's always a third side to the story. And again, the more you study, the more you understand, and the more you see the reality of many things, there's bias, there's conflicts of interest, many things. Therefore, you have to know the law as well. You have to review them, and you have to make an assessment before you speak to understand the ramifications of the words that you say and the information you share.